From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. And today is Memorial Day, when we remember the men and women of the armed forces who gave their lives in the service of our country. The last full measure of devotion, as Lincoln puts it. Among their numbers is Paul Bensman, who grew up in Alton, Illinois, across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. After graduating from high school in 1939, he followed his siblings into the military, joining the Naval Air Corps. 5 years later, during World War II, his plane went down over Palau, an island nation in the western Pacific. Bensman was among thousands of Americans who've been declared missing in action over the years. And while he is still missing, some great detective work led to the wreckage of his plane and one of the things he carried. At a memorial service back in 2015, covered by the website riverbender.com, his niece, Mary Lee, described opening the package that contained her uncle's dog tags.
So we're sitting there on the porch of my sister's house and shaking like I'm shaking right now because all I wanted to do is touch it. It's as much as Paul that we have.
The challenging task of finding and repatriating personal effects and remains is the work of Project Recover. The organization was the subject of a feature-length documentary film that came out in 2021. Let's listen to part of the trailer.
This connection to the past, it's a strange feeling. These are not sterile pieces of steel or aluminum. They're what's left of people who are fighting for their lives. An MIA family never puts away the loss of somebody who hasn't been able to return home.
It leaves a void in your mind and heart.
It gives something back for the sacrifices that have been made is just very important to me.
It seems to me like it would be looking for the smallest needle in the largest haystack.
You're looking for that one angle, that one curve that you know is not natural, and you hope you find it.
My grandfather's disappearance was something that we did not talk about. How do I thank these people? The only thing that I could do is join them and hope that we can do this for somebody else.
You never forget your comrades.
These family members that are missing, we can't forget them. They're heroes.
Every military man that fought in wars, they should be brought home.
They've been missing for a long time. If it takes 100 lifetimes, we're gonna get them back.
Two of the voices you heard there were Pat Scannon, the founder of Project Recover, and Derek Abbey, the president and CEO of the organization. I spoke with them back in March 2022 when they were in Central Illinois to meet with anthropologists, veterans, and others at the University of Illinois. We'd love to hear what you think about our program. Send an email to talk@21stshow.org. Okay, here now, my conversation with Pat Scannon and Derek Abbey of Project Recover. Pat and Derek, welcome to the 21st Show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to join you today.
So, Pat, I'm going to begin with you. We started with Paul Bensman's case because he's a native of Illinois. What do we know about his experience in World War II?
Well, we knew that he was one of the airmen on a three-member crew of what's called a TBM Avenger, which was a torpedo bomber, flew off of an aircraft carrier. We know that during the pre-invasion of the island of Peleliu, they were hit by anti-aircraft fire, and the tail was shot off, and that caused the plane then to angle down and go straight down into the jungle. And that's where the crash site we ultimately found was this circular debris pattern in that jungle.
How did you find the wreckage 70 years later?
We went to the National Archives and surprisingly, we were able to find a short clip of a motion picture from the battle scene that actually saw the plane get shot down, and a streak of fire that went straight down. And from that, believe it or not, by looking at the ground and certain markers, I used my high school trigonometry to actually figure out where in the jungle it should be. And we went into the jungle and we found it. It was actually one of the, if you will, technically easier sites to locate from that standpoint, but it had been overgrown quite a bit by jungle since that time, and it took a while to figure out the layout of the debris pattern.
What was the film? Was that standard procedure, or does that just happen to be that there was somebody filming that day?
I think there was some attempt to get film footage of the actual preparation for the battle. I'm not sure for what purposes, but there is actually quite a bit of combat footage from different islands campaigns, and we were just fortunate that I'm sure it was absolutely coincidental because we could see, before and after. The cameraman just happened to be on the plane near him at the right moment.
Wow. All right, so according to the National League of POW MIA Families, there are 65 Illinoisans who remain missing and unaccounted for. Your organization says thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines remain missing from 2 world wars, as well as conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, and Afghanistan. Derek, how do you decide which cases to investigate?
Well, we conduct research year-round, so constantly combing the archives, receiving data from all sorts of sources, and we compile that in a database. Currently, we have about 500 cases in our database associated with more than 3,000 missing Americans, and we prioritize those cases based on a number of pieces of data, and so that includes access to the region, information available, likelihood of success, things like that. And usually we'll take about the top 10%, review those every year, and make decisions on missions we're going to execute based on a number of factors like I listed. But then also we have a partnership with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, which is the official Department of Defense organization responsible for accounting missing Americans. And so through that partnership, sometimes they also reach out to us to conduct certain search missions, recovery missions, and other things like that. So it's a long process, and we go back to that information on a regular basis because there's consistent flow of information coming in that can add to those cases and quickly bring certain cases to the top. And so it's a pretty fluid process, but it's all based on when we think we're going to have the most success, and we try and complete those stories and bring those answers back to those families.
Maybe for some of our listeners who are not in the military or are not veterans or don't have family who are in the military, can you just, Derek, talk a little bit about the importance of recovery operations like this, both in real time, what was done during World War II and other conflicts to try and bring people home, and why it's still part of the ongoing mission of the military and groups like yours?
Well, it goes back to, the moment that those service members don our nation's cloth and make an oath to the Constitution, we as a collective make a promise to them that should they fall in battle, we'll do everything that we can to bring them home and return them to their families. And the context of war, as you can imagine, and for more than 80,000 cases, that promise hasn't been kept, but it doesn't have an expiration date on it. And so providing answers to those families is just deeply important to us, and we've seen the impact that this has on families, and that is what truly drives us. And that those service members made the ultimate sacrifice on our behalf, and those families continue to make that sacrifice. And so we do what we can to provide answers to them and return them to their loved ones. As far as World War II and the previous conflicts, specifically World War II, which has the largest number, more than 70,000 still missing from that conflict, we were finishing years of very, very difficult fighting, and that war came to its conclusion, and many service members, their families, the entire nation was ready for that conflict to be over. So they did make an attempt to locate those that were still missing. They didn't have the technology and the capability that we have today, so they weren't completely successful in that process. But they did make an effort, and they made efforts over the years. But then, fast forward decades later, and this just became a more important topic to our nation, and more resources went into it on the Department of Defense side, specifically related to the conflict in Vietnam. And then that's continued over the years and expanded to include, of course, World War II and forward. And then we just, since the very beginning of this, when Pat started this work, it became, a personal mission, I think, for every single one of us, but then also a collective mission for us to contribute and give back to our nation. And I don't think you can ask any of us, and if we believe where we are today when each one of us started this work and being able to have the impact that we have, but we just kind of kept on putting the work into it. And, we see when somebody is repatriated, we've had these moments to interact with these families and witness the memorial and celebration that happens around that, and communities come together, and the healing that occurs at the individual level all the way to the national level. And it's just something that we are completely committed to and passionate about, and will continue until the work's done.
Let me take a moment to remind listeners, this is the 21st. I'm Brian Mackey. We're speaking with Derek Abbey and Pat Scannon of Project Recover. They work to locate and repatriate the remains of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who went missing in action. Pat, can you talk about how you came to be involved in this work?
Yeah, I happened to be part of a dive team in 1993 that was looking for a historical site in off the waters of Palau, a ship that had been sunk by then Ensign George Herbert Walker Bush. This was at the time was the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Palau from the Japanese enemy at that time, and this was part of a planned celebration. We were able to locate the ship, but I stayed on, and for reasons that I'm not totally sure of, asked a guide to just show me more wreckage, and he brought me to the wing, to an obvious wing of an aircraft. It had 2 engines on it. And I had built a lot of model airplanes as a kid, and I knew immediately this was an American bomber. And that made me ask the question, where is the rest of this airplane, and what happened to the crew? And there's a very special moment in my life where I jumped off the boat, walked to the wing, and I decided I was going to figure out that answer. And it was a transformative moment in my life, and I decided to do something not only about that plane, but very rapidly came to learn that how there were many, many Americans missing in action, even within the waters of Palau, but obviously globally. And I decided to do something about it. Didn't know how I was going to do it, but started off with me alone, and over time built up the team to where we are today.
And Pat, who pays for this work? Are there volunteers? Are there donations? How does this work?
Well, we can probably answer that in 2 parts. In the first 20 years or so, I brought on volunteers, each of whom had some sort of expertise, whether it was scuba diving or navigation or photography or something, and we would self-fund it. In other words, we would take the total cost of the trip, divide it by the number of individuals, and that's what we paid. As time has moved on and technology has become more complex, self-funding is really not an option, and that's where I'll turn it over to Derek. He'll take it from here.
Yeah, as we've grown and had success and visibility, we established ourselves as a nonprofit organization, and like most nonprofits around the country, we rely heavily on the charity of the public, and that comes in a number of ways, through individuals donating to the organization, or corporate or large-scale philanthropy, as well as we have a partnership with the Department of Defense and grants and things like that. So it is a nonprofit organization, but we still rely heavily on our volunteers. They do donate their time, their expertise, and their blood, sweat, and tears to make this mission successful. We wouldn't be able to do it not only with the volunteer work that we receive from our members, but also the support of the public.
Derek, I understand you were serving in the Marines when you became involved in Project Recover. How did that come about?
Pat used to attend a lot of these World War II reunions, and they're few and far between now, but I was a member of a fighter squadron, VMF A-121 in the Marine Corps, and had just returned from a deployment in the Middle East and somehow became connected with the World War II cadre. They were having a reunion in Indiana, and me and a colleague took a plane out there, and they were interested in the Middle East and F-18s, and we thought, nobody's really interested in that. Tell us about World War II and Corsairs, and just drew that connection to the World War II cadre for my squadron, and through that squadron met Pat, and him and I became fast friends. He invited me to be a member of the organization. I was deploying quite a bit at the time, but finally went on my first mission, and actually on my very first mission, and I was part of a location, and we located actually a member of my squadron. So from that point on, really, for me, there was no turning back.
All right, we need to take a quick break. More from my conversation with Project Recover when we return. This is the 21st show. Stay with us. This is the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. Today is Memorial Day, and we're revisiting my conversation with Pat Scannon and Derek Abbey of Project Recover. This is an organization that works to locate the remains, or at least personal effects, of Americans who went missing in action over the years. I first spoke with them in 2022 when they were on the campus of the University of Illinois to speak with anthropologists and veterans and others. There's a documentary film about their work. It's called To What Remains. You can find it on many major streaming platforms. Let's get back to that conversation. Derek, once a team has located some remains, what happens next?
Well, so first it's really locating a site associated with those remains, and it might be obvious that there's remains exposed or something like that, in which case, we always have an archaeologist on hand, and we'll coordinate that with the appropriate authorities of establishing a chain of custody for their return. Most of the time, that's not the case, though. We find a site, we know what the site is, who it's associated with. We'll document that site fully, turn all that information over to the Department of Defense, and then they'll arrange for a recovery mission to be conducted. And many times that can include us going back and doing either an underwater recovery or a land recovery site. We'll recover osseous materials and other artifacts associated with that could potentially contribute to the identification. And those remains and artifacts are transported back to a lab in the United States, either in Hawaii or Nebraska. And at that point, a blind identification is done to determine who they are. And then from there, a notification process takes place with the families, and the families will make a decision once they're notified on how they want to memorialize their loved one. They could do it in Arlington National Cemetery, or they can have it in their own home cemetery if they want, or any other process that they like. But it's a pretty long process, very, very thorough process. When they do these recoveries, or we do these recoveries, it's very much like some people might think of as a CSI crime scene, where it's very intentional and professional, and everything is done and documented the appropriate way in coordination with the host nation in the United States to make sure that everything is done right and those families have all the answers that they can get.
This may be a bit of a morbid question, but other than the ID tags, which are metal and can survive for long periods of time, we're talking about jungle or underwater. What are some other artifacts that you've located?
Well, we've located a number of artifacts, but there's all sorts of things that can contribute to an identification. Most people are aware of DNA technology with the remains, and even a lot of dental records are used. But as you mentioned, dog tags can lead to and help with that identification. But things like rings and watches and other things that can help. if they're commingled with those remains, we might know who they are. And then where they're located in an aircraft and other equipment associated with that position that they might have held and things like that. There's a lot of things that we find that may or may not contribute to an identification, but definitely for us, hit us on a personal level and drive things home. You mentioned the Paul Binsman case, and that Avenger specifically, I remember being on that site, and I think every team member that's been on that site remembers this, finding a small teaspoon that had USN for United States Navy carved into it. And that drives home the piece of, we're not looking for airplane wreckage, we're looking for the people associated with that aircraft. And when I was in the Marine Corps, I used to carry a spoon in my pocket when I was in the field or on deployments. If you had time to eat, usually it wasn't a lot of time, and I wanted that utensil handy to get through whatever meal was available. And I think about Paul Binsman and the other members of that crew who might have had that spoon in their pocket, and were thinking about, they might have just left the galley when they left the ship, or were thinking about getting back to it at the end of this mission. And unfortunately, it just didn't happen. So,
Pat, we heard that clip earlier in the conversation from 2015, a memorial service for Paul Binsman about his dog tags. When are families notified in this process?
Typically, the families are notified when DPAA has completed the identification process and can associate a given set of remains with a given individual. And that will consist of DNA analysis and analysis of personal effects in composite. At that point, there is a process where the DPAA notifies.
Can I say that's the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are service casualty offices by Army, Navy, and so forth. And those offices then set up the process for notifying the families about the identification of remains. Now, the families will get a clue ahead of time, and that is once a set of remains have been found from a site, oftentimes it'll be perhaps more than one individual, or for whatever reason, it may not be absolutely clear what the site is. So the families are asked to supply DNA samples, which is essentially rubbing a swab on the inside of the mouth. So they know something is going on. That in no way guarantees that the remains have been found, but they'll know something is going on. But once the whole process is concluded, then they are formally notified. And as Derek said, they get to select the venue for the delivering of the individual back home. So it's a very dramatic process. The Department of Defense goes to a great deal of trouble to show respect for the individual. There'll be a service cadre of, if it's a Navy individual, it'll be naval personnel that attend all the way through the ceremony process and ultimate burial. These are, interestingly, not just family events, but in our experience, particularly if you want to use Paul B. Binsman as an example, even in that setting, with only the delivery of the dog tags, the entire community turned out. The mayor declared it Paul B. Binsman Day, and that's exemplary of what we have seen. People turn out on the streets as the procession moves to the cemetery. It is truly an all-American event that occurs once these individuals are returned to their families.
Well, you sort of hinted at something else I was wondering about there, which is, and maybe you answered it, but I wondered if there are cases in your experience in which there are no descendants to notify, right? A lot of the cases, these were young men. Maybe they were not married or didn't have children yet. I wonder if you're ever having to, have a situation where there is no family left, or where you have to educate people about their sort of little-known uncle or something like that.
One thing's for sure, many of these MIAs did not marry before going into combat, and so they will not have direct family. If that individual had siblings, then there's hope for a more direct family connection. And believe me, even second and third generation individuals, even remotely related to these MIAs, are deeply affected by, number one, the fact that these individuals are missing in the first place, and secondly, that people care enough to figure out what happened to them and bring them home and answer unanswered questions. The Department of Defense will go to great lengths to figure who is the closest relative, often initially for purposes of DNA identification, but ultimately for repatriation. It's very unusual that there's absolutely no family. We had not, as an organization, confronted that in our experience yet, but there certainly are many occasions where the individual, because they were not married and had no children, only have second-order family members who are aware of the individual.
Let me remind listeners, this is the 21st. I'm Brian Mackey. We're speaking with Pat Scannon and Derek Abbey of Project Recover. Derek, what nations, where have you done searches?
Well, for years, we would do one mission a year to the nation of Palau. And then about 2014, 2015, we really started to scale our work. And now we've been to 21 different nations around the world. We're doing multiple missions a year, pretty much everywhere. We continue to work in South Pacific. We could go back to Palau, but we've also been to Chuuk and the Solomon Islands and other places. Currently, we have a team out in Tinian and Saipan doing some deep water searches, but we've spent time in the European theater, Italy, Croatia, Denmark, and other places. And we've gone to the Middle East as well. We've conducted a mission to Kuwait. So it's not only World War II that we're focused on it everywhere between World War II and Desert Storm, Desert Shield. We've also conducted a mission in Vietnam. Our most recent repatriation was Paul Avalise, who was repatriated last year to Springfield, Oregon, and he was lost on a B-52 off the coast of Vietnam. So that list of nations and places that we have worked continues to grow all the time, and this work continues. So we're looking forward to working in many more places.
Are there no-go areas because of foreign relations as they stand today?
Yeah, well, the work that we conduct is we wouldn't be able to do it without the support of the host nations. We work in their countries with their permission, and so there are nations, as you can imagine, that we just don't have access to, or it's a lot more difficult. I mean, the most obvious one is North Korea right now. We're not conducting any missions in North Korea. There's a significant number of losses related to the Korean conflict, but we just don't have access to that area because of diplomatic means. And other places, it just might not be the safest to work. So kind of going back to that earlier question, when we're assessing missions that we're going to execute, that's one of the factors that we take into account is access to the area.
Pat, can you talk about the technology over the years? You mentioned this earlier, but I understand, started with a machete. Now you're using drones and GPS and
right.
Google Earth images. Go ahead.
Yes, so it's really terrific to be part of the evolution. And you're right, we started off with boots and machetes, not even GPSs at the time. We thought a GPS was this incredible invention. But over time, we recognized the limitations of standard scuba diving for underwater stuff and standard approaches of doing grid searches in jungles. There's very limited. And in 2012, we met scientists and oceanographers from the University of Delaware and the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, who were working with autonomous underwater vehicles, these sort of torpedo-shaped sensor devices that can do wide area searches far greater than anything a scuba diver could ever do. And it was sort of a mutual love affair in the sense that they had the technology and we had the mission, and we've joined forces with them, created Project Recover formally through a 501c3, and began expanding initially our efforts underwater, and that has grown. Even the technology we used from 5 years ago underwater has grown either by increased sensitivity or different kinds of additional packages we can put on these underwater robots. On land, we're just starting. The problem oftentimes is the overhead canopy. It can limit the jungle canopy, can limit the ability to see through the jungle, but we're starting to use drones with very sensitive magnetometers. We're just beginning to look at other technologies such as LIDAR, which is a laser method which can be used to penetrate jungle in an effort to enhance the process of search. So we expect that even 5 years from now, the technological advances we'll see will even accelerate what we're able to do today. It's a phenomenal experience to be part of that and bring in technologies. One of the things we're doing here at the University of Illinois is meeting with scientists of different kinds to get ideas as to how better to do our mission.
Interesting. All right, let's go to the phones. George is on line 4 from Rockford. George, thank you for calling in.
Well, thank you. And the gentleman you're speaking to, we honor these guys with so much regard. I've had an uncle who's been missing in action since December 2nd, 1950, from the Battle of the Chosun Reservoir in North Korea. And since the mid-50s, I've been searching information as to the whys and the wherefores and how. And in my search, I've been blessed with some wonderful military people, including John Gray, who is a free war veteran, and George Rashula out of Hawaii. And I convinced some of my father's siblings to submit DNA evidence, and I've included my DNA evidence, hoping that when they were in the Chosun area that they might come across some of Johnny's remains. My fervent hope was always that we would get that accomplished when one of his brothers or sisters was still alive, but unfortunately his last sister passed away this last year. And so I've been in touch with the U.S. Army Human Resources Command out of Kentucky, the Casualty and Mortuary Affairs Branch, and we're working with them, and I'm hoping eventually that we can get that identified. It would please me a great deal.
All right, George, thank you so much for the call, and I'm sorry about your aunt, and best of luck with the search. I hope
thank you,
find success.
And I hope these gentlemen have wonderful success with these new technologies that are becoming available to us every day. Good luck, gentlemen, and thank you for all your hard work.
And let me just say we've been speaking with Paul Scannon and Derek Abbey of Project Recover. Their organization goes all over the world hiking and diving to find the remains of American servicemen and women who are missing in action. They've completed 60 missions to date, repatriated 15 Americans. Paul and Derek, thank you so much for your work and for joining us to talk about it today on the 21st Show.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Yes, absolutely.
More to come after a short break. Stay with us.